So without much ado, respected chairman, my fellow panelists, intellectual brethren of the state of Odisha, students, all of you are present. I come straight to the point. Sir, I am conscious I've already wasted a minute of your time. I'll go straight away to that. I don't know whether this is... So without going much ado, the theme for today, the decline and the resurgence. Since all the speakers have already would have spoken and will speak on what is the significance of Kalinga's maritime architecture, I would not take much of your time considering that we have a very short period. I will just, in a sense, set the context. What was the maritime strength of the erstwhile Kalinga? Does the Kalinga exist and why the decline? The decline is mostly in the mind of the successors of the Kalinga race, of which I am a humble representative. I rue the fact that today, the DNA that has the Kalinga Sahasika does not permeate through the blood of the successors of this mighty Kalinga race. If you refer to the Vedic references, if you refer to cultural references such as Kalidasa's Raghuvansha, there is no description other than the king of Kalinga who is so beautifully described by the companion of the princes. If you come to trade and commerce and you understand as to what the erstwhile Kalinga has stretched from a point of time from the Tamralipta, which is from the Ganges, into the Godavari belt without a doubt, and the fact that we have today conceded physical geography to adjoining states. I'm not making a political statement, but the fact that the erstwhile Kalinga exists in the mind of people does not exist in the geography today, and it doesn't work, sir. So can I just borrow my pen? And then you look at a cultural melange that comes out of it, an identity formation about the Kalinga, and I, representing the port sector of India, would speak about references from ancient, medieval, from the sailors, from their diaries of sailors such as Walter Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, from English bureaucrats and administrators such as Elphinstone in Mumbai, in erstwhile Bombay, into people like Stamford Raffles, who established Singapore on the behest of the Viceroy of India, into such records which speak of the excellent maritime activity in this Indosphere. Modern Indian maritime history has not done adequate justice to the Kalinga maritime activities that existed. Without a doubt, when you place the economic, cultural, and also I come into shipbuilding, you will understand as to why a mighty power that it was and what influences it had on the life of people. Now, since I'm conscious of the point that I have very little time, I set the context by saying what is the potential. Without a doubt, the decline coincides with the coming of the Muslim rule into Odisha. Thereafter, the dismemberment of the erstwhile Kalinga by every successive person or ruler that has ruled, whether it was the Islamic rulers who came from Bengal, the Mughals which divided into tributary states and the Mughal kingdom, whether the Marathas who then said that the Mughalbandi area and the tributary states, or the British who have done no service to the state of Kalinga by dismembering a beautifully rich state by apportioning portions to a new political boundary. Now, I'm not a politician to speak about this, but I rue the fact that the erstwhile Kalinga exists in the mind of people, and I caution that if you do not bequeath your history to your successive generations, you will have a people who are ahistoric in their mind, who would not understand what significance it means in 261 BC when Ashoka comes, whether he converts, whether he becomes a Buddhism, whether he's not a tyrant, but his edicts speak of the fact that his daughter Sangamitra and Mahendra, his son, in various periods of time have carried Buddhism from the shores of Kalinga into Sri Lanka, and then it has become a world religion. Today, people such as William Dalrymple, people such as other historians, and in modern times speak of the great fact that what India has contributed in terms of taking to the world and the influence of the spread of Hinduism, Buddhism, and the astronomy, mathematics of India that went. Now my subject is not on that. My subject is what would ancient, since Madam has spoken about the various ports, I will contextually set the northernmost port at Tamralipta, a cultural melange, the southernmost port at the waters of the river Vamsadhara, from which the Mahendra Tanya also flows, and Kalingapatnam stands in mute recognition of the erstwhile kingdom. The many ports that have intersped between themselves, and the revival of the modern ports in modern Odisha at each of the locations that I now speak of. I will not obviously speak of what we have lost, but I will come contextual to tell you that if it was Piple, which is the modern mouth of Suvarnarekha, and the idea to revive a port, if it was the Palmyra's point which Walter Hamilton speaks is today coinciding with modern Chandbali Dhamra, and in the sea you have an obelisk kind of thing which gives you a guidance into the harbor, and then you come to Paradeep, and an idea in modern times very beautifully quoted by the erstwhile Prime Minister when he says, "Willed by the people, I commend to you this yet another national adventure." To my mind, the revival of Odisha's maritime glory begins in 1962 when we set up the port. Because of certain political considerations, the port comes to Odisha in a place on the shores of the Mahadodi. When we speak of this excellent national adventure, you come down to where Astarang is, and now when I speak of this, I will very briefly talk about what advantages and why we should revive a maritime vision, and why the modern Odisha depends so much on the revival of a maritime recognition, in a sense, an idea that emerges in the minds of every Odia, and the idea that maritime development is linked to the prosperity, continuity, economic, cultural of Odisha is so important. Just a period as to why this, if we have a strategic location, we have a look-east policy, access to Southeast Asia, we are abundant in natural resources, I don't have to speak about that. Water, which defines the way human civilization emerges in all the riverine civilizations of the world, and the fact that Odisha has multiple rivers, including rivers that flow into an adjoining state, and we are emerging as an industrial hub. How do I get all this together to revive the maritime, and where does Odisha sit into this? Just a word about the export excellence that Odisha brings, and why we need to bring this back, and I come straight to the point that I wish to tell you. I think I've been 7 minutes into my time. Yes, I'm watching that. I don't want to, I'm very scared of Professor Basa. I'm very scared of Professor Basa. No, in all like this thing, I'm scared of his knowledge. I wish I could borrow some. Thank you so much, sir. So I come straight into Odisha, and you will see in the map of Odisha, 480 kilometers of coastline, and why the vision of 2036 Bikasito Odisha is so much aligned to revival of a maritime glory, and on the shoulders of which we dream of a prosperous maritime Odisha. It is not incidental that all the sites chosen by the government of Odisha in various times coincide with each of the ports, except the harbor of Chilika, which W. Hunter in 1872, first book of Odisha, published in London in the English book, says, if only Chilika was a deeper harbor, it would be one of the best harbors in the world. And of course, Huensang comes and speaks of tens and thousands of towns along that. And so I leave aside Chilika, Madam, Manikapatna and Palur on the south was what Ptolemy refers as Amphiterian, a point of departure. So the point of departure, for me, the point of departure is the mansioned glory that left Odisha. Today, to revive each of the sites, Bichitrapur, Kirtania, Bahabalpur, Chandipur, Chudamani, Dhamra, Jatadhar Muhana, including Palur, which we wish to build a Palur and Bahuda Tukada shipbuilding, and you look at Gopalpur, each of them had a port in the past, and it is on these. My idea, we don't deserve or we don't need to have 13 ports. What we need to have is to revive it. We need to have at each of the guard your borders. On the northernmost, your river Suvarnarekha, a port is coming up through a PPP, which is a public-private participation on the new policies of government. A port on behalf of Tata Group is coming up, which will lead to a question of bringing the hinterland which once was Odisha. I will not forget the fact that Singhbhum was a very integral part of Odisha, and the fact that the steel plant in Jamshedpur exists, and this will give us security to the cargoes of Jharkhand, which is the larger hinterland. And here, I will not speak of a I'll not speak of a political hinterland, rather an economic hinterland that Odisha enjoys along with the landlocked states of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and to a large extent also to the land to Bengal, which would not be possible to have a deeper port. So when you look and guard each of your boundaries, you revive a modern port. And what is a modern port? If an erstwhile port spoke about the skill of the Kalinga Sahasika, shipbuilding, catamaran shipbuilding, into rivers that gave into seas, you revive each of the modern ports. So at Suvarnarekha and at Dhamra, which is a revival of the Chandbali port, make it ahead of inland water navigation. The point I want to say is that if you look at Odisha, ports will not stand in splendid isolation today. Ports and maritime are a continuity of a larger architecture that weaves an economy. If erstwhile economy of Odisha was about establishment of a cultural, kind of ambassadorial role, it was also because of the wealth of the temples. The temples were where we had wealth, dissemination of knowledge. So today to do that, if you wish to revive your ports, it's not enough to make them to stand in, as I say, splendid isolation. To revive a port today, you need to build a whole complex and architecture which will support a port. And what is it? I thought it's a young group. I must tell them, no port like Paradeep will stand in isolation. Sir referred to my tenure in Paradeep. When I went into 37 years, I found a beautiful port belying its opportunity because we didn't have adequate connectivity. So what is this connectivity? The erstwhile connectivity was cultural. We could carry our culture to Southeast Asia. Without a doubt, Gorubandar, Stanford Ravel says that no temple would have come but for the Kling. So if the Kling took the cultural role into the Southeast Asia, today we will carry that maritime economic role. To do that, you have to necessarily harness what is the larger hinterland. By doing so, you need an artery of roads. You need and connectivity strategic through paths of rail. You need economic corridors to unopen every of your port. It's not enough to have just a road, just a rail. Modern world will exist on a transition of energy. Today, as I speak to you, an energy transition is taking place. We do not know whether the hydrogen ammonia will substitute fuels in the world in shipping navigation. Perhaps it will because it's a green fuel. While it does this transition, it will undergo a lesser carbonic fuel such as natural gas, which is, when we do that, two of the largest natural gas, which is LNG terminals, are in Dhamra, and one is coming up in Gopalpur. So what I'm trying to say is that the economic security, the harnessing of the economy through a maritime revival will be a port-led industrialization of Odisha. I look at the rivers and I tell you that each of the rivers will now revive a port and also give way to what was called an inland water navigation. Please understand, it's a part of Government of India's scheme to revive the waterways of the ancient Ganges, and also the revival of one waterway, which is NW5 in Odisha. Today, Government of India recognizes that there is one waterway which is economically strong and viable because it connects Talcher, it connects Kalinganagar, and it opens up into the seas at Paradeep and at Dhamra. Is it without doubt that this was the ancient East Coast Canal that the British dug up to connect Tamralipta to Dhamra? So when you can have a water route, is it not the 1886 famine which revived an Odia spirit? Whether Sir Revansha did it adequately or not, I will not get into that. But the fact is, Naonko Durbhikyo gave us an understanding. A port in isolation cannot stand. False Point could not have been a port without having the Jagannath Sadak there, without having a rail which didn't exist at that point of time. Odisha did not have rail. But the fact is, just a port would not have sufficed to drive the hunger out of the Naonko Durbhikyo. It would have required roads. So when you do inland water navigation through the shores of Talcher, coastal coal to give energy security to India. It is recognized India and Odisha today contains 26% of India's coal, and it will revive it to give energy security across. We are working on a policy called rail ship transportation of coal from these areas. I will end. I'm conscious, I think I'm coming nearly to the end of mine. My theory, or my submission rather, to the young crowd, to intellectuals over here, revival of a mansion glory which happened due to, because we flitted away and we were, disseminated by our efforts, to revive it, a port-led industrialization. Just 3 slides to tell you how the world in Europe changed. Rotterdam does not belong to Netherlands. It belongs to Western Europe, giving security of cargoes to entire Western Europe. The revival of the Shanghai, I could speak of the entire South China Sea, and when we do comparisons of India and China, it is fruitful to do that, because the revival of China is a generation of sacrifice starting from the Long March. And today, when you compare Shanghai, Shenzhen, Ningbo, Yangshan, just the port of Yangshan does 43 million TEUs. The entire of India does 22 million TEUs. When you're comparing your manufacturing scale, where does the maritime revive? When you're talking about Vikasit Bharat, when you're talking of China Plus strategy, when you're talking of taking India to a manufacturing hub, export competitiveness, logistics, port are the only key to unlock employment, give security to you, tell your people to revive it, come back and recognize that you were once the Vishwa Guru, which you have now lost, without any political intertones. Let me look at one example in India, the port of Mundra. The only port in India to have hit 100 million. We ended last year by 200 million, but it is more important. In a forsaken place like Kutch, and between Kandla and Mundra, nearly 20% of India's cargo is handled over there. Imagine what it does to the economy. And what would happen if Suvarnarekha, if Dhamra, if Paradeep, if Astaranga, the old Harishpur, Marichpur, on the Devi River, if Gopalpur, and a shipbuilding at Bahuda comes up, then the Odisha that I am looking at, maritime future, is one based on a robust blue economy. I'm aware no in-development can come without a climate challenge. Now, to challenge climate, my favorite sentence has been to recognize the responsibilities, the boundaries and contours of each other. So economy and ecology would survive together. And for me, port-led industrialization, necessity for land banks in the vicinity of ports to make what happened in Shenzhen, Shanghai, Ningbo, Mundra in India, Vietnam, where we have gone and apparently, Hindu colonization done by the Klings. Get examples from them. Development of economic corridors, I told. Warehouses for agriculture, multimodal logistics parks weaved into a larger maritime strategy. And then the road, the rail, the inland waterways as pillars on which your entire strategy stands. Shipbuilding. When we do that, shipbuilding is being considered as one of the finest. Once upon a time, before the advent of the British, India's share in the economy was large, we know, but one of them was also maritime, and one of them was also adequate, appropriate shipbuilding. Revive the shipbuilding, and it's not enough. The government speaks of a Sagarmala strategy. Modernize your ports, have new ports, and port-led industrialization. And also, eventually, the denominator would be, and the aspiration would be, development of human happiness index. And to that, make that happen, coastal communities through coastal ecology and marine ecology. I will sign off by saying, I have often been asked at Dhamra, and I have intellectuals who know, when the port was coming up, everyone said the turtle migration would disappear without understanding the bathymetry and giving, I wouldn't say non-aware opinions, but fact is, if you don't know enough, don't comment just for the sake of commenting on something. Study. There are adequate studies to show how the littoral drift comes from the southern part of India into the eastern part, into the Bay of Bengal, into what was the Purva Sagar, as we say, into the Gangetic plain, as we say. When you study and realize, and I was a votary to say, the turtle migration will never disappear from Dhamra. In all humility, sir, I will tell you, every year that we got the Dhamra port going, as if to prove a point, today, the best ambassadors of our port are the olive ridley turtles, which come unfailingly every year to the shores of Gahirbata, which is just 10 kilometers from the port of Dhamra. I was conscious and aware of my responsibility to maintain Bhitarkanika, the world's largest saltwater estuarine site, and the Bhitarkanika. And therefore, today, when you sum all this up, the glory that you wish to revive and the architecture that you knew for development is going to be stable. Because eventually, the blue economy, as I say with all kind of thing, is a source of food and agriculture also. Seaweed, and I mean, there are multiple things. A 10-minute doesn't do justification to tell you why on a maritime. It's enough we have spoken why we have lost a glory. Today is a clarion call to revive. And to revive, young generation must understand, be intellectually empowered to understand what the past was. Because eventually, those who forget the past will not get an opportunity. And for me, the unlocking is through a key called PPP. The government says public-private participation. For me, it's not that. For me, it is planet, people, prosperity. Thank you so much. Jai Hind. Vande Mataram.